All right. This is Steve Reid. He was in the Peace Corps. And what country did you serve in?
I served in Ghana
Ghana. All
from
right.
1994 to 1996.
Okay. And Steve has lived in Oklahoma for some time, and so that's why he's here. If he had never lived in Oklahoma, he wouldn't be here today. So, first thing I want to ask you about, Steve, I want to thank you for doing this, and then I want to ask you about your upbringing. Where was it? Tell me a little about your parents, siblings.
Okay. So I grew up here in Oklahoma City. My dad was born in Washington but landed in Oklahoma because of an assignment with the Air Force. And my mom is also a native Oklahoman. She grew up in Union City. I've got one brother and one sister. My sister worked for the state treasurer's office for a while. She retired a couple of years ago, and my brother joined the Navy and traveled all over the world, and he passed away a couple of years ago.
Sorry to hear that. Did any of them play any role at all in your becoming a Peace Corps volunteer?
Not my family, no. My initial contact with the Peace Corps was when I was in high school. We had a class that...
And where was that in the year?
It was in 1978
Okay.
at Bishop McGinnis High School.
Okay.
So we had a class that required us to do some sort of community service. And I started out doing some work at a elementary school, but all I was doing was just grading papers. And I was looking for something a little more
helpful.
Yeah, more helpful. And so I changed. It was fortuitous that the teacher that was operating class had just gotten a request from World Neighbors, which was headquartered here in Oklahoma City.
Yes, still is.
And they were looking for somebody to help them out. They had a lot of library resources, but it was very disorganized, and so they wanted somebody to come in and help them put that together. And
was that out on 122nd?
No, at the time it was at 50th in Portland.
Okay.
So it was at their old headquarters. So it was before they moved out to 122nd.
All right.
Most everybody that worked there was a returned Peace Corps volunteer. And so listening to their stories, I just thought, someday I want to do that. And after I graduated from college and worked for a few years, and I thought, I think I'm ready to do this.
Was there anybody that you were listening to at World Neighbors, at RPCV, who particularly struck you or motivated you?
You know, I don't remember anybody specifically. I just remembered the stories about living in a foreign country and doing something that was trying to help those people. And that felt so in line with the purpose of that class. And so I think that's what really struck a chord, that organizing a library is a simple thing that was helpful to them, but going overseas and trying to provide some sort of service was really what struck a chord with me.
And you realized that it was a 2-year commitment, or did you then?
At the time, I probably didn't know. After I finished college, I was just so eager to get out and start working. It crossed my mind. It's like I knew a lot of people went right out of college, but my degree was in engineering, and they didn't really have any positions for engineers. And I remember somebody telling me, well, you can, with that sort of a background, you could teach. And I thought, oh, I don't want to teach.
Why did you think you didn't want to teach?
Well, I'd spent all that time getting an engineering degree.
Yeah.
So I thought, teaching just didn't seem like a very good use of my skills.
Seemed like a step down.
A little bit.
Yeah, because lots of people can teach, but then lots of people cannot be engineers unless they're trained.
Right. But then once I started teaching, I realized not everybody can teach. So that was a eye opener for me.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay. Let me pause this for a second. How long did you volunteer at World Neighbors?
it was just for one semester.
Oh, one semester.
Right. Well, and that would have been if I'd started at the beginning. So what I recall is I was working at the school for a few weeks, and after grading a lot of papers, it's like, I'm sure this is helpful to the teacher, but it's not very fulfilling for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not quite a full semester, so a few weeks short of that.
Okay. Where'd you go to college?
I went to the University of Oklahoma, and I started out, I got a degree in mathematics, and then after I finished that, then after a semester off, I went back and got my degree in mechanical engineering.
What'd you do during that semester off?
I just worked, made a little bit of money to help defray college expenses.
Uh-huh. Okay. So, mechanical engineering, you said?
Yes.
Okay. How long did that take? A year or two?
Well, I had a lot of requirements out of the way with my first degree, and so it took me about 5 semesters, because all I had left were just the engineering classes and one math class.
Mm-hmm. When you were at OU, did you ever speak to a Peace Corps recruiter?
No.
Did you ever see one?
I don't remember seeing anything about the Peace Corps when I was at OU.
Not a thing.
No.
Okay, so you had your introduction at World Neighbors, so to speak.
Yes.
And then nothing else after that.
Right.
Until you meet somebody else who talked it up, or?
No, it was after I'd worked for a few years as an engineer, and I wasn't finding that very fulfilling, and so I thought, well, what's the next step? And so I was trying to figure out if I wanted to start my own company or go back to school or what I wanted to do, and I just woke up one day and go, oh, Peace Corps, this is it.
Really? You woke up one day?
Yeah, and just thought,
wow.
yeah. Because I was doing a lot of soul searching, trying to decide what my next step was going to be. And I thought, well, I can do anything I want. I don't have anything tying me down. I wasn't married. So I thought, yeah, this is it. And I don't know if maybe I had seen something in the news that kind of sparked my memory of it, but I just thought, hey, this is it. I wasn't ready to do it when I got out of college, but now I'm ready.
Let me ask you this. At that point, you're gung-ho, sounds like, but I assume you never talked to anybody who ever was in the Peace Corps at that point.
No, I hadn't. Oh, other than the people at World Neighbors.
Yeah.
Right, but when I was making that decision to apply to the Peace Corps, then no, I hadn't talked to anybody at that point.
So you didn't think, Steve, I better get some names and call them up, make sure I'm making a good decision for myself.
Well, when I talked to my recruiter, and before I made the final decision to commit to it, and they had offered me the position in Ghana, and I said, can you give me some people that I can talk to? So I didn't just go in cold. I did talk to 5 people that were names that they gave me.
Who had served in Ghana?
They had all completed their service.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything like that. That's great.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it was, I asked them about what they did and what their challenges were, and then my last question for all of them was what they missed most about Ghana, and without fail, every single one of them mentioned a local food called fufu, that
How do you spell that?
F-U-F-U-O. So
Okay.
you don't, sometimes you hear the O pronounced on the end, fufuo, but we just always said fufu.
Uh-huh. And what is it?
Fufu is, they take a tuber, could be what they call the yam, which
Uh-huh.
was it had kind of a fibrous bark looking cover on it. They would peel it, boil it, and then they would mash it up. And they had a very interesting process for doing that. So they had looked like maybe a giant tree stump that they had cut out, and then a large limb that they had cut so that they could pound it. And so usually it was a two-person process. So one person would take the components of the fufu and set it in the tree stump, and then they would have a bowl of water because it was very sticky, and so they would dip their hand in the water so that they could turn it, and then the person holding it's kind of like a mortar and pestle, so they would hit that, and it would mash it, but then the cook then would wet their hand and then fold it over, and then they would continue that until it was the right consistency.
This sounds like, was it ceremonial
No,
or every day?
it was every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
Okay.
If the cook didn't have an assistant, they would do both jobs at the same time. So they would turn and then pound, and they would do it all themselves.
Okay.
The most interesting fufu cooking that I ever saw was I was in a bus station in northern Ghana, and they had little food kiosks set up, and there was a place where they were serving fufu, and the lady that was making the fufu had 4 helpers, and it was like a little 4-cycle engine running. So they were at like cardinal points, and she was sitting in between 2 of them, and she would turn it, and then the 2 on opposite sides would pound, and then she would turn it, and then the other 2 would pound. And once they got going, it was like boom, 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 and they could serve a lot of fufu because they could turn it out really fast.
How long would this take from
You know,
beginning to end?
it might take, if there was just like one cook and one helper, it might take 5 or 6 minutes. But the one in the bus station there, you know, they could make it in a minute. So it was something. I wish I had a video of that,
Oh,
because
I'll
that was
bet.
amazing.
Gosh.
Yeah.
You know, if you Google that, you might find it.
I'm sure it's recorded somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You know, and when I first got there, I have to say I was so anxious to try it, but I was kind of disappointed
Oh,
that it's like, well, this doesn't really have much taste to it. They would take the fufu, and then there would be a soup or a stew that you would serve it with, and you would pinch off a piece of it's kind of like a bread dough consistency. You would pinch it off and then dip it in the soup, and then you were just supposed to swallow it.
yeah.
So you weren't supposed to chew it.
You weren't supposed to.
No,
I wouldn't
no
like
chewing.
that.
So it took a while to get used to it, and I think that what I think happened was that living in the United States, that there's so many chemicals and additives in our food, it kind of numbs your taste buds because everything's got to be intense.
Yeah.
And so it took a while for my taste buds to regenerate, and once I was in that state and then willing to go back and try it again, it's like, wow, this is really good.
Well, that's very interesting about the taste buds. Huh. Okay, so you applied. When Barb told me she applied, she said it was quite a lengthy application. How about yours?
It was lengthy, and my understanding is that first priority is given to recent college graduates, because if you don't get them an assignment right away, you're going to go, well, I could be making money. They'll start working someplace and
Right.
meet a significant other and get married, or it makes it harder for them to leave. And so since I was working at the time, they thought, well, we're not sure that he's really serious about this. And so it took a little while before something opened up, and they had filled all those high priority slots and gave me a chance. So it took, I think I waited 7 or 8 months
Wow.
from the time that I applied until I got an assignment.
Gosh, that's something.
But you know, it had all of the usual things: getting fingerprinted for the background check, the health. You know, go in to get a health check to make sure that you're healthy. Once we were far enough along in the process, then I had my wisdom teeth taken out. They said that
They mandated that?
yeah, I wouldn't go if I didn't have my wisdom teeth out, which they paid for it.
Yeah.
But they said the #1 reason for medical evacuation of Peace Corps volunteers was problems with their wisdom teeth.
Good Lord.
So it was
Never
just
heard that.
more cost effective to just say, let's get your teeth out. And I probably would have eventually had to have that because I had one impacted tooth that at least that one would have had to have come out.
Wow, that's something.
Yeah.
So, 7 or 8 months, was that a period of angst for you?
You know, it was. It made me question whether this was the right way to go. You know, I was still looking for other jobs, but I was probably a little pickier in what my second job was going to be.
Yeah.
And I had some ideas of things that I enjoyed about my job that I thought, well, maybe this might lead into something. So it was not an area that you could just go work for a company that did that. So I was thinking about, well, maybe I can just start my own business doing that.
You still work?
Yeah.
Up to the point where Peace Corps said, come on in?
No. I left before that. So there were a few months, and I was single. I had a roommate, so I was saving quite a bit of money. So it wasn't, there wasn't a sense of urgency that I had to go right out and find another job.
Was Peace Corps corresponding with you in any way during this time? Don't go away, Steve. Don't go away.
Yeah,
We're going to get back to you.
I think that what I remember is that I had a recruiter, and I would talk to them, and so.
Was the recruiter in Dallas?
Yeah, it was in Dallas, which is where I went for my interview.
Yeah.
Which they would have done a phone interview, but I thought I'd really want to see what's going on here, meet the people that I'm working with, and just felt it would be more effective if I showed that I was serious enough about it that I was willing to go down to Dallas. And
How long was your interview?
it was 30 minutes to an hour.
Okay. Do you feel like you were well prepared for it?
Yeah, I did. There was one question that kind of struck me. They asked me if I was in a serious relationship. And I thought, well, I'm not sure you can ask that.
I think you're probably right, but I understand why they
Right. You know, because that would be we had some people in my Peace Corps group that, you know, they were in a relationship, and after being gone for a few months, they just decided that that wasn't going to work, and they left and went home.
Well, okay, there you are.
So
was that the last step, the interview, before you were accepted?
right, I'd completed the application, done the background check. The medical stuff wasn't required until I had been accepted. And so that was the final step then, was to get the physical, including a drug test, and then getting my wisdom teeth taken out.
Okay.
So that was the last thing before I actually left.
Okay. So how much time elapsed after you had your interview before you got your acceptance notice?
It was months. It was
months?
Yeah. Well, like I said, you know, they had that placing recent college graduates was a higher priority.
Mm-hmm.
And
did you have any idea it could be months? Did they tell you that?
No, I didn't. So, yeah, and it was funny that one of the things I remember was one of my coworkers was fascinated when I actually got the assignment, and they went through and downloaded a bunch of information about Ghana to give to me. And so, there were other co-workers and friends that were very interested in what I was trying to do.
And when you were accepted as part of a group?
Right. We had, I think it was about 60 people altogether.
All right.
And so...
And when was this that you got accepted?
So this was in 93, and then, well, it must have been 94 because I left in the summer of 94.
Okay.
So early 94 was when I found out that I was going.
And then they told you were going to Ghana, or did you know that already?
I knew at that point, because everybody that when we went to the staging, it was all people that were heading off to Ghana. So we were doing all of our, there was some final medical steps and some of the psychological preparation of getting ready to go overseas. And then we just we traveled as a group, so we all boarded the plane and then flew together over there.
I'm interested in the part where you are waiting for your acceptance and you don't know where you might be going. Is that true? You had no idea?
That's right.
You could have wound up in the Philippines or
on
Peru?
Yeah, anywhere.
Yeah.
I remember one of the questions on the application was they had 5 different regions that they split the world up into, and they ask you to rank those in the order of your preference.
Yeah.
And I remember saying at the interview, it's like, look, okay, I put these down only because you asked me to list them, but I will go anywhere. And I think I listed Pacific as number 1, and then maybe South America, Asia, and what may have held the application back was Africa was my last choice.
Probably did.
And so then when they called me up and said, "Hey, we'd like to send you to Ghana," and they were, I could just hear the hesitation in their voice. It's like, but that was your 5th out of 5, and I was trying to make light of it. It's like, well, don't think of it as the 5th of 5. Think of it as 5th out of 100.
Yeah.
So it's not my last choice. It's in my top 5.
That's right.
And so they said, okay, we'll give you a chance.
Now, what at this point, what did you know about Ghana?
Nothing.
Not a thing.
Not.
You knew it was in Africa.
Right.
Did you know about its colonial history at all?
No, I mean, I had to do some research for that, and then my coworker that gave me the printout had a lot of history, just general information, where it was, how big it was, population.
What do people do there?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I knew also at that point that along with the country, then they told me which program in the country, that it would be education. And I'm like, well, I hadn't really thought about being a teacher before, but I think I can do just about anything for 2 years, so I'm willing to give it a try.
Okay.
And part of it was using that time then to help discern what I wanted to do after Peace Corps.
So, when did you and the other 59 report for training?
So I remember it was in Philadelphia, so all of the volunteers, or the trainees technically at that point, all the trainees that were going to Africa did staging in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Not Mississippi?
Right.
Okay.
And while we were there, I remember after we had done all of our training that, they just let us go out into Philadelphia, and I remember that they were celebrating the public announcement of the Declaration of Independence. So I think we flew up there either right before July 4th or on July 4th, and then that reenactment is July 6th. So it took a couple of days for the Declaration to be printed off, so we have copies to give to people.
Yeah.
So it was
Oh,
early
that's
July
great.
when we all met. We spent 3 days there, and then we loaded up on buses and drove to New York City and flew out of JFK.
But where did you spend your time training? And how much time did you spend training?
It was just at a hotel. I don't remember which hotel it was. So it's just like going to a business conference. You know, they have conference rooms where you can go down. They had meals provided for us. And then we just spent pretty much the whole day. So part of it was...
So your training consisted of 1 day?
No, 3 days.
3 days?
3 days.
2 in Philly and...
No, three days in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And at the end of that 3 days is when we
you
got
went
on
to
the
New York
bus
to leave.
to
Okay.
fly away.
All right.
You know, and they were very upfront about it. They said, you know, this is not, you're not signing a contract here. So, you know, if for whatever reason you decide that this isn't for you, you know, you can step away.
Wow.
And so they talked about that a lot in the training. It's asking questions like, well, you know, what's your culture? Because we're getting ready to go to a different culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember scratching my head thinking, I don't know what my culture is.
It's all around.
Yeah, everything. and that was one of the interesting things about Peace Corps service was it was kind of like when I was learning a language in high school. I think I learned more about speaking English than when I learned German.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have something to compare and contrast with. And I think I learned more about what my culture is in the United States when I was living in the culture there in Ghana, a different culture.
So by the time you were in Philadelphia, you were positive you were going to go through with this.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody said anything or tried to change your mind in any way. You were set.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
I think my parents were probably scratching their head thinking, you know, what's going on? Why is he doing this?
He was headed in such a
Yeah.
great way. And
Can't you do some volunteer work here in the United States? Why do you have to go to Africa to do that? And then,
did they ever say that, or did you just kind of divine that?
it felt that way.
Uh-huh.
They never came out. No, actually, my mom did that. She did ask, you know, well, why do you feel like you have to go overseas to do this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can volunteer in lots of places here.
Right. What'd you say? You remember?
I just said, you know, I've given a lot of thought to this, and I've never really traveled very much before, and I'd like to do this.
Did you ever use the word in explaining that this was an adventure and you liked adventure? I'm not trying to put words in your
Yeah,
mouth.
I think I thought of it partially in that way. I don't know that I told anybody that, you know, I'm doing this because of it's an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds
Okay.
like a Navy commercial. Join the Navy, it's a great adventure.
Yes. Okay. So you flew from JFK to where?
So yeah, it was kind of a convoluted trip to get over there. So we flew from JFK and we stopped in Zurich, Switzerland, and
Nice.
never been to Switzerland before, but looking out these big glass windows out at the Swiss Alps, and that almost changed my mind. I was getting ready to just jump ship there.
Right here.
Yeah, this looks good. We made one other stop in Switzerland, and then we flew to a town in the middle of Nigeria, Kano, K-A-N-O, Kano, Nigeria, and nobody got off. One person got on, and we were only on the ground long enough to pick that passenger up, and then we took off, and then the next stop was in Accra.
Where?
The capital of Ghana, Accra,
How do you spell that?
A-C-C-R-A,
Okay.
which I learned very quickly because I pronounced
It's not Accra.
Accra. I was corrected very quickly. It's Accra.
Okay. I've never heard it pronounced before, and I've always said Accra.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're there, and tell me what happened then.
You know, it was such a long trip between the flight times and the waiting in the airport.
Yeah.
That was an eye-opening experience because I remember the security in the airport would be two military people with machine guns that were walking around. I thought,
Boy.
okay, the Swiss take security really seriously.
Yeah. Wow.
No joking around here
I guess
about
not.
anything. But it was grueling.
Hmm.
And by the time we got there,
You were wrung out.
I was exhausted.
Yeah.
And I imagine most everybody else was too.
Sure.
And they recognized that that was a long trip. So we loaded on buses there and went to a hotel. And they said, you know, we're just going to, breakfast is at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. If you want to sleep in, feel free to do that. We don't have anything planned for the day. So if you feel like it, get up and just go exploring. And then the second day, then they started.
Go exploring by yourself in a place you don't know?
Yeah, I don't know that anybody took them up on that. You know, during our training there, we did that. They said, okay, here's a treasure hunt. We want you to find these things, and you're teamed up with 2 other trainees, and we're giving you some money, and just go exploring.
Ah.
Find these things and learn about how to get around and where things are, and just try it out.
Did you make friends with any of those 60 that you are still friends with today?
I have. Most of them are Facebook friends now.
Mm-hmm.
Although about 3 years ago we had a reunion of sorts in Denver.
Oh.
There's a sizable Ghanaian community in the Denver area, and so we all pitched in some money, and they hired some of the Ghanaian families there to fix some homemade Ghanaian food that we ate and ate and ate.
How many showed up for that?
So they threw it open to anybody that was in the group before ours or the group after ours. And so I would say we probably had about 40 people that showed up there.
And some were in your group.
In fact, most of them, because the organizers were from my group.
Uh-huh.
Like one of my friends in the Peace Corps married somebody from the group before. And then I helped train the incoming trainees my last year that I was in Ghana. And so I knew quite a few of the people that came in the group after.
Sure. Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
That you got that opportunity. I hadn't heard of that.
Yeah, that was a wonderful experience.
Well, before we get to that.
Yeah, that was at the end.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff in the middle there.
Yeah. So, how long was it before your group broke up and you went to your assignments?
We had about 5 or 6 weeks of training.
Okay.
So we left after a few days in Accra. We went to a regional capital that was nearby called Koforidua, and they had leased space at a secondary school there that had dorms. And so we would live in the dorms and then did all of our training there at the school.
Okay. I understand now that Peace Corps volunteers train in the country that they were assigned to.
I think they may still do staging.
I don't know.
Just getting the final shots, but yeah, the lion's share of our training was done in Ghana.
Right, which I think should be.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, they helped you with cultural transition, with acclimating to the food. So when we started out, they had about 75% of the food we had was American style food and 25% Ghanaian. And then by the end, it was just a few things that were like if you just couldn't handle it, you had to eat some spaghetti, and everybody else had taken to the local food.
Oh, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's funny that I remember one night we wanted to give the cooks a day off, and so we got a group together that we prepared an American meal, and we made spaghetti. So we had spaghetti and garlic toast, and I remember one of the language trainers sat down next to me, and she leaned over and she just said, "Steve, I can't eat this, but I don't want to throw it away. Would you please eat this for me?" So I had already gone back for seconds, and so I ate another plate of spaghetti. So I think that lasted me for 3 years that I was there. I didn't eat any more spaghetti.
No spaghetti?
Yeah. But, I never thought about how, it works both ways, that, they've lived in Ghana their whole lives and they're not used to eating American food.
Sure.
So, throw down a plate of spaghetti and they've never had it before. It's like, oh, okay, I don't think this is going to work.
What about your language? What
So,
are you going to learn?
we started language training right away, and there was one local language that, although English was the official language of the country,
Mm-hmm.
there were dozens of local dialects.
Yeah.
But there was one that they chose for the initial language training because just about anywhere you could go, you could find somebody that would speak that. If they didn't know English, they could speak that. And the basics of it were really very simple to pick up. And then once we received our assignments, so which part of the country we were going to, then they switched and you got a second trainer that was in the language where you were assigned. So I was fortunate that I was posted to an area where it was the same language that I'd started with.
Oh,
so
yes, you were fortunate.
Continue with that.
Mm-hmm. And so you didn't have much trouble learning that language?
Picking up the basics, and I felt very comfortable with, asking directions or telling somebody who I was.
What about having a conversation in which you wanted to cover the waterfront?
Right, that would be a little more difficult. I never got to that level.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my fellow volunteers had jobs where language was a lot more necessary to
Mm-hmm.
get deeper into it. And in fact, in the non-education sectors, most of those had counterparts that you're expected to learn the language very well. Because if you were going to the tribal council, if you were going to the chief or somebody to say, I would like to do this project in your area,
Yeah.
you were kind of expected to talk to them in their language. So a lot of them pretty much spent the first year just getting to know people and improving
And
their
the
language skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Did any of them think that this was a waste of time? Spending a year like this chatting and
I'm sure some people did, and we lost a few people. And I imagine where you might really start to question whether it was worthwhile is if you got sick. You're thinking, okay, what am I doing here? I don't really feel like I'm doing much, and I'm sick. I'm worried about my health. I should just go home.
uh-huh.
During training, though, we went on a site visit where 1 to 3 trainees would go to visit and stay with a first or second year volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh.
I went to southern Volta region, which is in the southeast corner of the country. And I remember the volunteer that I stayed with thanked us. He said, I'm so glad that you came. Because he had been there for a year, and it was just like that. He was questioning whether he was making any difference at all.
Yeah.
And he said having these 3 trainees fresh off the plane, bumbling around, wearing your American clothes, dragging 2 suitcases.
Uh-huh.
And he said, I realize how far I've come
Yeah.
in that year. And he was thinking about going home. But when he saw really how much of an impact he had,
Hayseeds.
that he said, yeah, I'm going to stay.
Huh. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
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 Well, very impactful for that guy.
Yeah.
Well, that's... So what was your assignment? You said education.
Right. So we had math teachers, science teachers, and art teachers.
Art.
Mm-hmm. Ghana was one of only 3 countries at the time that had an art education program. And I was chosen to be in the math program.
Sure.
And once I got to my school, though, and this was true of just about any of the volunteers, that you're going to teach whatever they needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so they needed somebody that could also teach the science classes, and I felt very comfortable doing that. So I taught the core math classes, advanced math classes, and then advanced physics and chemistry.
You had quite a load.
It was a load.
You weren't replacing anybody, you were bringing...
No, actually I was. So there was a volunteer that was at that school that was one of our trainers, and I think it was unusual that most of the Peace Corps volunteers that I've talked to, they were just told, you're going to go here. And they put up a map and they listed all the different sites that were available and said, where would you like to go? And they tried to match you as much as possible with where you wanted to go.
How in the world did you even know where you wanted to go?
Well, okay, a lot of people, when they went on their site visit, a lot of people chose to go to that region of the country. And
because they'd heard it was what they preconceived idea that this is what I want?
Well, so the other two people that went to the site with me to stay with the volunteer for a week,
Yeah.
both of them chose to stay in that region.
Uh-huh.
And so having gone there and they go, wow, I can live here,
Mhm.
I can do that. And I
Oh,
chose my site because of the volunteer that was at my site where I ended up going, listening to him talk about what his site was like, and I thought,
that's great.
I think that sounds good. So I had a chance, for all the time during training to talk to him about what his site was like. And I was the only one that chose that. He was a very good trainer, and I think a lot of the other trainees were intimidated by that and thought, boy, I'd hate to have to go and fill his shoes.
Yeah.
But there were enough advantages to that I thought that would be a good fit for me.
Did you have any co-teachers?
Co-teachers?
Co-teachers, right.
at
That you and somebody else would cooperate in teaching that course?
No.
No.
It was always just on my own.
Okay. So there was a position there, and the position was going to be filled by a Peace Corps volunteer.
Right.
Year in and year out, as long as they were there.
So I think that the volunteer that was there before me, I think he was the first one.
Uh-huh.
And then they did put somebody in that spot after I left, but then I found out that after the first term that they weren't very comfortable there, and then they chose to go to a different site. And I don't think they put another volunteer there.
Did this person who chose to go to another site have any trouble doing that?
No.
Nope. Just said, this isn't right for me, isn't meeting my needs, whatever, and they said, okay.
There may have been, who knows if there were personal issues that came up, because it was a female volunteer, so volunteer before me was male, and maybe somebody there made an advance at her, and she just thought, I don't feel safe here, and I'd rather go someplace else.
You had female Peace Corps volunteers in the country, right?
About half of them were female.
Half of them?
About half and half.
Oh, okay. Well, a lot of them must have had a problem that you didn't have, and that was the men hitting on them. Was that, when you talk to female volunteers, would they talk about that much? It
didn't seem to be a real serious problem.
Uh-huh.
One of my closest neighbors told me that there were people that asked. It's like, hey, let's go.
Yeah, let's go on vacation.
Yeah, let's go do something. But as far as I could tell, most of the time, if they said no, then, that was the end
That
of
was
it.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
All right. Tell me about your class sizes. What were that like?
They were fairly decent. I was in a small school. So
How large was the small school?
it was around 100 students.
100 students?
So secondary school in Ghana is 3 years. So they have 6 years of elementary, 3 years of junior secondary, and 3 years of senior secondary. And so that was spread out over 3 years.
And you were teaching in each division or just the top?
So starting out, they were a little concerned about my ability to understand the first year students.
Uh-huh.
That, they had classes every day in English, but they came from a lot of different places, and so there was no real consistency to how good their English was. And so it wasn't until my last year there that they gave me a class for first year. And that was an eye-opener.
What grade would that be in?
That would be
equate?
10th grade here.
10th grade?
Yeah.
Okay.
10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade.
And you said it was an eye-opener?
Yeah.
How?
Well, I'd been there for 2 years already, and I'd had a little bit of trouble with one of my science classes. The students just stopped doing anything in my class. And so I went to the head of the school and I just said, there's something needs to be done because they are not participating. They're not doing their work, they're not answering questions, nothing. And so the head of the school brought them in and talked to them, and she said, well, they don't understand what you're doing.
Oh.
It's like, okay, I can work with that. So I went, and next class, sitting with the students, and there were 3 students in the class, because it was like the 3rd year, it was advanced chemistry, I think.
Uh-huh.
And I just said, so the head tells me that you don't understand what we've been going over. I said, what is it you don't understand? And they said, we don't understand anything. I thought, well, okay,
Wow.
I can see why there's a problem here.
So I have been a total failure.
Yeah, and a jerk about it too. I was thinking that, why are they refusing to do anything? Because they had no idea what to do. They didn't even know enough to ask a question about what they didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it was just also a cultural respect for the teacher, that you would never challenge the teacher. It's like, you're not doing your job.
Uh-huh.
So we started beginning, and I tried to tell them, look, if you are not understanding something, you need to let me know. We don't want to move on if there's a gap here.
Mm-hmm.
And several weeks later, it repeated, and they weren't doing anything.
You could sense this pretty soon this time?
It happened pretty quickly the second time, and it's like, okay, I'm getting the feeling that you're not understanding. And we started over again, a 3rd time. We went all the way back to the beginning.
Wow.
We were able to go a little more quickly, but I thought, okay, I need to find a different way to explain things that we're doing here, and give more examples and give more practice in the class.
Did you ask other Ghanans for help?
No, I didn't. I probably should have. I guess I was overconfident in my ability to teach. Mm-hmm. Most of the trainees in my group had never taught before. Most of them were like me. They had worked in some other field, joined the Peace Corps, and then they had taken the teaching position.
Mm-hmm.
So,
did you ever meet with parents?
No.
Never?
Never met with parents.
Okay.
I mean, not like a parent-teacher conference like we would have here. I met parents, although the school had a small dorm for students that lived far enough away that they couldn't easily get to class every day. But some of them lived in town. And they did have some events where families would come in. At the end of every school year, you'd have graduation, and so that was a chance for me to meet some of the parents.
Did it seem to you that most of your students were well nourished and
Yeah.
active and
Yeah. The only time it seemed like somebody was maybe a little undernourished, there was a young girl, and it was my third year, so she was a first year secondary student, and she was just so petite, and she was a resident, or so she lived in the dorm, and she was only there for one term. So her mother had sent her to the school while the father was away. Father came back and found out that she was in school, and he immediately came down and took her out of the school because he didn't want his daughter to be educated.
wow.
That only happened one time, so
One
that wasn't
time.
like
Okay,
an
that's
occurrence.
good. That's
Although the school where it was an all-girls school, so there was another secondary school that was there were three towns that were very close together. I mean, you couldn't tell that you would cross from one to the other, they were so close. And so there was a large secondary school in town, New Drobo Secondary. And then mine was founded by some missionaries that...
Your town?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
When the missionaries came in and they wanted to do something to help the area, and when they had talked with residents there, the overwhelming number of them said that they wanted a school for female children. By the time, and this was a statistic that we learned during training, that it might be 50-50 at the beginning of school, but it was 90-10, 90% male, 10% female by the 12th year.
Why was that? Were they getting married?
Well, they might have gotten married, but that wouldn't be the reason to drop out of school. It would be either the parents couldn't afford to continue to send them to school. Even though education was free, you still had to buy uniform and books and supplies.
And you didn't have a worker at home.
Right.
They
And if there was any need at home, if the mother needed help with cooking or taking care of the rest of the family, they would pull their daughter out before they would pull the son out.
Yeah. I
Needed
see.
help working in the fields or washing, cooking, whatever the chores were.
Uh-huh. All right. What's the name of the town you're in?
The town I lived in was called New Drobo.
Spell that, please.
N-E-W-D-R-O-B-O, New Drobo.
Does it mean anything? Did it translate to anything in English?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
There was an old Drobo and a new Drobo. I never.
Were they side by side?
No, they were actually pretty far away.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not sure. I never really dug into it to see if there was any meaning to the name. Some of them were. So where my school was a town called Quasi-Buachrome. And Quasi is a day name, and Chrome just means town. So it was like Quasi's town.
Yeah.
So
how? Give me an idea of the size of this town, Drobo.
New Drobo was, I mean, area-wise, it was probably a square mile at the time. They didn't have electricity or running water in the town. And I've gotten onto Google Maps and looked at it now. They were supposed to get electricity anytime, and so I'm sure they have it now. And so with addition of electricity and running water, a lot more people live there now. So it's quite a bit bigger than it was when I lived there.
Would you say 1,000 or less when you were there?
You know, based on the size of the other secondary school, you know, they had several hundred students, probably more than that, probably 500 or 600 students at the secondary school.
Wow.
And so it was probably closer to the 10,000.
Within 1 square mile?
Well,
Certainly not.
yeah, probably not within a square mile. I was just thinking of when I get into town and then drive to the end of town, it was about a mile. But
People live beyond.
Yeah.
That, right?
yeah.
Were most people in that town farmers?
So New Drobo was a regional capital, and so there were quite a few other jobs. So there were government jobs. There was a hospital, post
Oh.
office. There were other shops there. There were people involved with transportation. So you had the bus drivers, the managers at the bus station. So there were quite a few people. I think that I would say the majority of them were probably farmers, but there were quite a few other jobs too.
Okay. Did you get to know people from these other professions as friends?
I did. So probably my closest friend there um, was a teacher at New Drobo Secondary, so the big public school in town. He was a French teacher, and he also owned a pharmacy in town. So his wife would run the pharmacy during the day, and then after class he would go and work. He had gone to France to further his education to become more proficient in French. And I think that's one of the things. So he had traveled, and so there was that bond of having traveled before. And I think he could understand what it was like being the fish out of water in a place that, where you're not familiar with the customs and culture.
Yeah. Well, from your judgment while you were there, would you think that most of the people that lived in Drobo were happy to be there?
I think so.
Or satisfied? Let's say.
Yeah. So one of my other friends there was, he worked at the Catholic Church, and he was an assistant to the priest there at the church. And we did some traveling together. So the first Christmas, we went up to the far northwest corner of Ghana where he was from. And my roommate during training was in that area, so we kind of decided that we had plenty of reasons to go up there during the holidays. And he had several friends that it was very weird. He came up to me because these friends came over to the room where I lived, and after they left and he came back and he said, "These are my friends, but you need to be very, very careful around them."
What do you mean by that? What did he mean? That's what I'm
they didn't have jobs, and so he helped to support them, but he was really concerned that they might come in and see something and steal something from.
Or even ask you for money? Would they do that?
They might. He probably told them not to. In the 3 years that I was there, I think, other than like a beggar on the street, I think I can only think of several people that came up and asked me for money. One guy wanted to start his own business and needed some seed money for it.
He had a proposition for you?
He did. He wanted to raise chickens. He wanted to have a commercial chicken farm, and all he needed was a little money to buy some chickens to get started.
And you're American and you're rich, and come on, work it over. How much were you making?
About $150 a month.
Is that equivalent to what the Ghanaian teachers were making?
I think it was a little bit more. And they said that it would be comparable, but I found out that it wasn't quite the same. And they justified that because, we didn't have a support network. And the people that lived there that might be making less, they had family and friends that they could go to if they needed help for something, and we didn't have that. Plus they gave us a little bit extra so that, because traveling was expensive, and they wanted us to travel when we had the opportunity to go around and see other parts of the country.
Would you have to apply for money so that you could travel?
Nope. We were just given a monthly allowance. We would set up a bank account at a local bank, and that was just transferred. So at the end of the month, we just knew that we were going to get our $150, and it would be in the local currency. But that was what the U.S. equivalent would be.
Okay. Let's see. I'd like to know a little more about your teaching, and if you ever came to a point where you felt like you needed help in your teaching, or you felt like you just weren't imparting it the way you wanted to.
Yeah. I started to talk about this, and that third year that I was there, and for the first time, they assigned me to a first-year science class, and so the students in that class had very limited English, and so I tried to put myself in their shoes, thinking, okay, if I was taking a class in the subject in a different language that I hardly knew, what would I do? And so I wrote out a lesson plan for that first day. So tell them a little bit about myself and tell them a little about what to expect in the course. And I had several pages of notes, and I knew that a big part of the class, even though it was a science class, was helping them to develop their English. And so I would write these notes up on the board, and then they would copy the notes, and then we could go over them. After looking at my notes, and I thought, wow, this isn't going to work. I've got 3 pages of notes. I've got to do that in 50 minutes. I thought, it's just not possible. It's too unrealistic. And so I thought, okay, what's the essence of this lesson?
Yeah.
And so I reduced it down to 1 page.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was kind of proud of myself, and I looked at it again. I thought, that's too much.
That's it. Oh, that's
No,
too much.
no.
Oh.
1 page, that's crazy.
Uh-huh.
You know, if this was in Chui, I'd be lucky if I got past the first sentence, being able to figure out what was going on. So I finally narrowed it down to 1 paragraph. I had 4 or 5 sentences.
Wow.
And I wrote those up on the board, and we went through it, and that filled up the whole lesson.
Wow.
It's like, oh my gosh, that was... I'm so glad that I didn't just go with my first instinct to say, okay, well, this is what I would do in a normal class in the United States to cover this much material. So
it was almost like magic, wasn't it? Going 3 to 1 to 1 paragraph.
Right. Well, it was helpful, and I can understand the wisdom of not giving me a first-year class my first year that I was teaching. That, I mean, they had taught there. They knew what it was going to be like. And so I needed to get a little bit more teaching under my belt before I was ready for that. And they were right.
Did you have what you would call a satisfying social life there in the community?
So probably the first 6 months that I was there, I found teaching pretty exhausting, and so I really didn't do much. But when the weekend would come, then I would hop on a bus and go visit another volunteer. And that lasted until I got sick.
How'd you get sick?
I just wore myself out, and I'm
what
sure
was the
that
diagnosis? If there was one.
There wasn't. It was just I had a fever and just had to stay in bed for a day, and then I was fine.
Oh, it was just 1 day?
Yeah.
Oh, you made it sound like you got sick, like I got TB.
Well, I felt horrible. I had a fever, and I could feel it coming on, too. I mean, I was on the bus, I was on my way home, and I just started feeling worse and worse. And then by the time I got there, it's like, oh, I can't. I had to send a message to the faculty or to the head of the school saying, I'm not going to be in tomorrow, I'm really sorry.
So where did you get treated?
You know, we had med kits that had some basic medical equipment and drugs, and I just was able to use that and just take some aspirin, and then once I got better, I just realized, okay, I just wore myself down. It might have even been something that was in my system from before, and it was just that I was just so worn out that it just was able to take hold.
So did you gain the wisdom at that point to moderate?
To not hit the road and go like a crazy man for the whole weekend and show back up. One of the tasks that I had at the school was I also helped develop the timetable. And so it was like nothing that I've ever seen here. They had elective classes that met 7 periods a week, and they had core classes that met 5 days a week, or 5 periods a week. There were some courses that met 3 times a week, and some that only met 2 times a week. And so you had what the teachers were teaching and how many students, and then you had to fit them in the time blocks, and it was just crazy to fit all that in. And 5 days a week, but 7 periods, so you might have twice a week where you meet for 2 periods, and they might be back to back, or it might be once in the morning and once in the afternoon. You just had to put it where it would fit. And none of the other faculty members wanted any part of that, so I was able to set the timetable for all of the years that I was there.
Okay.
Which I had my Monday mornings off and my Friday afternoons off. It just magically worked out that way. So.
And you weren't expected to do anything on the weekends there?
Not school related. I mean, as long as I was getting the work done, we had time during the day where we could grade papers or work on lesson plans.
What did you do on the weekends if you didn't get on a bus and go somewhere?
So somebody told me that an average American might read 1 or 2 books a year. We had a nice little library there, and it was the average Peace Corps volunteer, I think, read about 20 to 30 books a year.
Right.
So spent a lot of time reading, walking around. I went with that one friend of mine that worked at the church. We went to a Pito bar. So Pito is sort of a local beer that they make. So it's just a grain that they ferment, and it only takes a couple of days for it to ferment. Longer ferments, the stronger the alcohol content. And I remember going, it was very early on. I mean, the guy came over, introduced himself, and said, "Hey, let's go down and I can introduce you to some people at the Pito bar." So it wasn't inside, so it was outside, and they just had benches in a circle, and then the proprietor would come out and bring you a calabash. So it was a gourd that had been cut and it had Pito in it. And the first time, I drank the Pito, and it wasn't bad. And there was a guy there, and most everybody that was there could speak a little English, except for this one guy. And he said something to me, and I asked one of the other people there in the circle what did he say? And they said, he wants you to insult him in English.
Insult him?
Insult him. And I got scared. I thought, wow, I don't want to insult him. I mean, he might jump up and try to fight me or something.
That's right. Wow.
So I said, no.
That's the way I'd take it too.
I can't do that. I think it was just, curiosity about what a curse word or an insult in English would sound like. I was curious about that. So I stayed there, and I had probably 3 or 4 calabashes of this Pito, and I'm walking back to my room, and
were you walking a straight line back to your
fairly
room?
Straight. And I was just the happiest person in the world. I was greeting everybody. It's like, "Hey, how you doing?" And I got back and I thought, wow, that's dangerous. That it would be so easy to feel that comfortable after drinking several calabashes to do that every day. Boy, I don't need to do that. I need to be careful that I don't start drinking all the time.
Does that mean you didn't go back?
I did, but the next day, knock on the door. "Hey, let's go to the Pito bar." It's like, no, I've got work I need to do.
Yeah, but you realized at the time, when you walked home, that you almost had an incident there. You could have had an incident. And you loosen up like that, and you're much more prone to have an incident like that.
Right.
You and others.
Yeah.
That really, I can't do this. This is not good for me.
Yeah, it was dangerous.
Despite the fact that I like being here.
Yeah. And I was also kind of concerned about what sort of reputation that would develop. It's like, oh, there's that teacher from the girls' school that's out drinking every day.
Oh, yeah.
So
Can't have that.
I think after that, most of the time when I would drink, it would be when I was out of town. So if I went over to somebody else's house, or if we had a Peace Corps meeting at the regional capital or in Accra, that we would go out and drink then.
When you got together with other Peace Corps volunteers, were these fun sessions? Were they bitch sessions? What were they like?
They were intended to be training. So it was, okay, we're going to continue what we started with your initial training, but probably through years of experience realizing that you needed to let off some steam.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think there was a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah.
I talked about the guy that didn't realize how far he had gone until trainees showed up on his doorstep, and then he saw that. Fairly isolated, no real way to communicate on a consistent basis with other volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that first session where we got back together again. We started talking about, well, what's it like at your school?
Yeah,
what are
sure,
your classes
sure.
like? And I think that was where it really set in that it wasn't unique. Well, the experiences that we had were universal,
Mm-hmm.
that they had the same issues at other schools. The lack of supplies, the lack of English skills, that it was a common problem. It's like, oh, okay, it's not just me, it's not just my side, so I feel a lot better about going back and continuing.
Did you sit around with any PCVs at any of these points and think to yourself, let's brainstorm this, let's talk about this and see what we can do
Mm-hmm.
to improve this situation, whatever it was?
I think part of the frustration was that in most other schools, they might be the only foreigner in the school,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the things that went on at that school were very unique to the culture. I mean, a lot of the schools still had corporal punishment. Yeah, you didn't turn your assignment in, sorry. We're going to send you to the gallows. No, I mean, the kids misbehaved and they might get paddled for it,
Mm-hmm.
or they might get sent home, which was horrible because, if you were at home, you weren't just going to sit and watch TV. You were going to have to go work in the field and help with what other family chores were.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really see a lot of that, but it was difficult. I think that since most of us were not trained teachers, a lot of it just had to do with coming up with ways to implement the things that we learned in training. So a lot of the local teachers would just lecture.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to write this up on the board, you copy it down, and you study that, and I'll give you a test over it. Part of that, I think, comes from the British tradition, and part of it is just because they were transitioning from a British-style education to trying to make something more their own. So they went from the O-level and A-level education that the British had there to the Ghanaian secondary,
Yeah.
primary and secondary schools.
Would it have to do with the lack of books too?
So my school, we never had a shortage of supplies. I was at one school where they had the books, but they wouldn't give them to the students.
Are we talking about textbooks?
Yeah, textbooks.
Okay.
If we give these books to the kids, they're just going to tear them up.
They didn't know what to do with them.
Well, they might not have really known how.
But if you
how to
can't
use the
read a
textbook.
book, what good is it?
Yeah.
Is that the problem?
It probably varied from region to region depending on how good the English skills were. Because except for the 2-hour class that they had in whatever the local language was, all the other books were in English, unless maybe they might have had a French class where it will obviously be in French, but they're all in English. And so at the junior secondary level, based on what I saw of the level of English ability for first-year secondary students, I have to imagine it's only worse in the junior secondary. And so that may have had a lot to do with it. We've got a textbook, but you don't know how to read this, and so we're not going to give it to you because it's just going to get torn out.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that. Did most kids have the understanding that if they really knew English well, they were in better shape in Ghana than if they did their future?
Yeah. I mean, if they looked at any of the important people, they spoke English.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it was conscious or unconscious, I think a lot of people drew that connection with speaking English is a necessary step towards having a successful career.
So you'd think that most kids that realize that would really want to concentrate on learning English.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they did?
I think so. I mean, when I look at the third-year students and the level that they had obtained compared to the first-year students, I think they really put a lot of effort into learning English.
You weren't an English teacher, but did you spend a fair amount of your time in class talking about or correcting English or teaching English in any fashion?
If they had a written assignment, maybe just simple corrections, like if there was an obvious grammar error or a misspelled word, I might point that out, but I didn't really try to teach English other than just moderating the English that they were using.
Did you think that their English skills were coming along as you saw them?
Oh, definitely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They were improving all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think, going back to your previous question about the importance, realizing the importance of English, but just the importance of education and specifically,
Mm-hmm.
that either they worked on a farm or they were close to somebody that worked on a farm, and they know how hard that is. You see somebody that's got a government position or any other job where it's not working in the field, and it's 10 times better than doing the back-breaking work of working on a farm. Because there were no mechanized farm equipment. It was all done by hand.
Mm-hmm.
You had a machete that
By
you
the
used
women,
to,
right?
No, men did it too.
Men too.
Yeah, breaking the soil, planting it, maintaining it, harvesting it. It was all done with a machete.
In Africa today, I understand it from talking to world neighbors, that a lot of women are doing the farming work and the men are living abroad, making money to send back, and then eventually they come back.
Yeah.
Is there any of that?
I didn't really see much of that. If they weren't living in town, they probably had a job some other town. They would just go to where the work was. I didn't really know of anybody that went abroad to work. I don't know.
That wasn't a goal that many people in the community had. I'm getting to the U.S. as soon as I can.
Right. There were a few people that asked if there was any way I could help them get to the United States. My friend from the church really wanted to go to the United States, and I had a couple of other people, but it wasn't just people knocking on my door all the time going, "Hey, how can you get me to the U.S. so I can live there?"
Wasn't that kind of a difficult conversation for you to have with them when they ask you, "Can you help me get to the U.S.?"
Not real difficult, because there really wasn't much that I could do other than just say, if you're really serious about it, you just have to go to the U.S. Embassy and start that process of getting a visa. You have to have a passport and a visa. And I'm not sure how much it costs to get a Ghanaian passport, but since most people could barely afford the cost of a ticket to ride on a bus someplace, I imagine a passport was probably
out of the question.
Out of their reach.
What was your communication like with other volunteers? You didn't have phones, right?
No.
So how would you communicate with Peace Corps volunteer in another place?
Uh,
Go there?
Either go there or, there was a magical postal system. I got a letter from another Peace Corps volunteer, and you could just go to the bus station. It was former English colonies, so they called them lorry stations.
Lorry?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you could go to the lorry station and find a bus that was going to where your friend is, and just hand them a note and just say, hey, would you take this there and have it delivered?
Yeah.
I mean, you could send it through the mail, but it was usually a lot faster to send it by bus.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got a message one time. The house where I lived was called the Diamond House.
Why was it called that?
The owner of the house worked for the Diamond Commission in Accra.
What's the Diamond Commission?
So one of the major exports in Ghana, so gold, cocoa, diamonds, timber.
Okay.
So a lot of natural resources. And so they had enough diamonds that they could mine in Ghana that they had a commission for it, and he worked there. So the Diamond House. So I got a letter that was delivered by one of the bus attendants. I lived really close to the bus station, and the letter just said, Peace Corps volunteer, Diamond House. Nothing else on it. And
that's you.
That was me.
Did you ever get any mail that was unexpected and kind of jolting?
Not mail, but the Oklahoma City bombing took place while I was there.
Ooh.
And so that was very jolting.
Wow. How'd you learn about it?
So there was a night watchman who was just responsible for making sure that nobody stole anything or damaged the school property. And he did that during the evening, and so not much to do, really. It wasn't a very big campus, and so every time I saw him, he was always listening to the radio. So I was walking to school one day, and he said, Steve, you're from Oklahoma, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, there was just a bomb that exploded in Oklahoma. And I just laughed. I said, you must have heard it wrong. Nobody's going to set off a bomb in Oklahoma. It would be New York City or LA or someplace. And so I didn't really think anything about it. So one of the things that Peace Corps recommended that we bring was a shortwave radio. And so I had my shortwave, and after class I went back and I said, well, I haven't listened to the news in a while, so I turned it on and got Voice of America. And sure enough, the top story was the Oklahoma City bombing. And I just thought, oh my God, that's horrible. I didn't recognize the name of the building, but I knew it was someplace near downtown. So I knew that the chances of anybody that I knew was affected by it. Talking to my parents later, they recounted the story of the day, that it felt like an earthquake.
Yes.
So the ground was shaking and everybody ran outside to see what was going on, and only later found out that the bomb had gone off.
You didn't get to see any videos of it, did you?
No, Peace Corps volunteers were given copies of Newsweek International. And so...
so you saw the pictures.
Right, and so they had in the issue following that, and it took a while for me to get that, because you had to go to the regional office or to Accra to get your copy. But when I picked it up, or maybe somebody else had gone and picked up a copy and shared it with me, and that was the first that I had seen of it.
So you really understood the magnitude of it at that time.
Yeah.
Gosh, did you feel like you needed to be around some other Americans to talk this over? What the hell is going on? Or not?
Right. So the missionaries that started my school were Catholic nuns, and so I had a community of Americans there that I could talk to. So I didn't need to travel any place. There was another volunteer that came the year after me that was an art teacher assigned to New Drobo Secondary, and so It was weird. We lived in the same town. We're just minutes apart, but I mean, we had to schedule to get together once a week just to catch up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so there was, by the time that happened, there was another American that lived in town.
Okay. Did people in your town, Ghanans, ask you about this? Did they want you to tell them why was this?
No, no.
Or do you think that most of them never even heard of it?
Probably didn't hear of it, or if they did hear of it, I mean, it was just someplace far away, and I mean, bombs go off all the time.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
And even if it was, I mean, there really weren't very many questions about it at all.
In many African countries today, there's a lot of gang violence. Was there any gang violence in Ghana when you were there?
None.
None.
I mean, other than just your normal precautions about any place you go that you're not familiar with, you don't go down a dark alley, try to travel in pairs. Other than that, I never ever felt threatened. I got scared a couple of times.
Tell me about one of those.
When I went to visit my roommate that first Christmas, and my Ghanaian friend stayed there because that was his family, and he had time off, but I needed to get back to teach. And so the day after Christmas, I started my journey back. My friend's family gave me a chicken and a guinea hen, a live chicken and a live guinea hen as a Christmas present. So I had a box that had these two fowl in them that I was carrying on a bus, which was not an unusual sight to see somebody carrying livestock on the bus.
No, it's very common, right?
Very common.
Yeah.
It was unusual for me. my first trip with chickens. And
did you think you were being pranked?
I knew they were very sincere about giving it. I was honored that they gave me livestock as a Christmas present. It would have been nice if it had been cleaned and packaged, but next best thing to that.
Okay.
The bus schedule, so Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, is a traditional British holiday,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's celebrated in Ghana also. I didn't know that.
Uh-huh.
Still my first 6 months there, and so I show up at 6 o'clock in the morning at the bus station, and there's a large crowd of people there, and there's no buses running. And so after doing a little investigation, I find out that there's no buses scheduled. They said there's a chance that somebody might just show up and take passengers on. So I waited, and about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, then the bus shows up. I'm able to get on the bus, but it only goes about halfway. So from the Upper West region to my town would take probably about 12 hours.
Mm.
And so we made it halfway. It was dark, and they just dropped me off at the bus station in Tamale, which is a big city in the northern part of Ghana. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? And they said, well, just wait. The buses will start running, and you'll get a bus to your destination. Well, I'm exhausted.
I'm sure.
I'm filthy dirty because the harmattan is a dust storm that occurs in Africa. It's the prevailing winds shift from out of the south to out of the north. So it's blowing dust and dry air off the Sahara, and everything is coated with dust. And I was coated head to toe, all my clothes, everything. And I was very tired. It was hot. And I thought, I'm not going to sit here for 5 or 6 hours
like
with
this.
my chickens. So I went to the security guard, the night watchman at the bus station, and I handed him my box of chickens, and I said, "These are for you. I'm giving you these chickens."
Yeah.
And he didn't speak English. He didn't speak Twi. The night watchman, he was from Ivory Coast, and so I didn't speak French or whatever his local language was. But I pointed to the hotel across the street, and I made a sign. It's like, I'm going to go sleep.
Uh-huh.
You know, here are your chickens. You know, Merry Christmas.
And he took them?
He took the chickens. So I went to the hotel, woke up the night clerk, and there was no running water there, so I was just
You were
covered with dirt. There was a little drip in the shower, and after about an hour, there was maybe a couple of inches in the bottom of a bucket. And when I poured that over my head, all it did was just soak in and cake the mud. So I just thought, maybe it'll be working in the morning, so I'll just wait. So I went back to the lorry station the next day, and I took my time. You know, it was nice, restful sleep. I didn't have to be back to school the next day. I went to the post office and called my parents, you know, wish them a Merry Christmas.
Oh, you could do that?
Yeah. So Tomalee is a pretty big town. They have electricity. Most people don't have a phone in their own house, but you can make a phone call by going to the post office. I think that's very British too. Because you went to the P&T, the Post and Telegraph.
Oh, okay.
So you could pay and then make a phone call. So I called my parents, and they were worried that I'd been losing weight. You know, it's like we got this picture you sent, and are you okay? No, I'm fine. So when I got down, I went back to the station, and it was bustling activity. I mean, there were all buses and people, just like a normal day. And but there was no bus where I was going yet. And they just said, okay, it'll be here soon. And so I'm waiting, and a young boy, maybe 7, 8 years old, comes up, and he's tugging at my sleeve. And he says something to me, but I don't understand. And somebody at the station said, he wants you to follow him. He has your chickens. And, you know, it's like, no, keep the chickens. But no, he's insistent that I come back and get the chickens. So I'm leaving, and I've never been to this town before. So I'm leaving, I'm following this boy, and I'm going down streets and alleyways, and I start to have all these dark thoughts. I can't communicate. I don't know where I am. Nobody else knows where I am.
You're set up. You're being set up.
I think, oh man, this is trouble. And just as I'm about to turn around and try to find my way back to the bus station, I see my chickens tied up in front of this house, and there's a little bowl with chicken food and a little bowl of water for them to eat. So I didn't properly convey that I was giving them the chickens. He just thought I needed to take care of the chickens.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure they probably wouldn't have cared if I brought the chickens into the hotel, but I didn't want to sleep with the chickens that night. And so that was the only time that I started really having doubts about, wow, I don't feel safe. I put myself in an uncomfortable position. Everything was fine.
Did you return to your town with the chickens?
I did. And I gave them to the nuns, and I said, I want nothing to do with these chickens. Feel free to make a chicken dinner. And they invited me to dinner, so I got to eat the chickens. That was part of my Christmas present.
That is some story, Steve. Did you ever have a girlfriend there in Ghana? Did you
a Ghanaian girlfriend?
Huh?
A Ghanaian girlfriend?
Any.
Okay. Yeah. So there was a woman who was the home economics teacher at the Nudrobo Secondary, and she went to the church that was associated with the school, and so the priest asked her to go over and help me with whatever I needed. And so she did my laundry for me.
What was her age?
She was probably close to my age.
Okay.
I found out later that She was actually Ghanaian royalty.
Ooh.
So there's a traditional system of government that you have the normal political system that you think of with elected representatives and the president and their Congress, but they still have a very strong tribal government, and so you have this different hierarchy of chiefs and queen mothers,
Mm-hmm.
and so her name was Faustina. Faustina's family was part of that bloodline, and so it was a matriarchal system,
Mm-hmm.
though, and so the chieftains and queen mothers then would pass on the mother's side of the family. I didn't find that out until Tony, who was the other Peace Corps volunteer that came a year later, that was teaching art. She went back frequently with Faustina to her town, and they just loved Tony so much that they made her an honorary queen mother.
Oh.
And it wasn't until then that I found out that she was part of that family.
Mm.
And then later on, and so I kind of felt like there might have been a little something going on there.
Attachment?
Very small one.
But there's no way you can court
No,
this person.
no. And then she ended up marrying somebody from that town, and Tony and I went back for a large part of that whole process.
Mm.
And so there's a very traditional ceremony where the groom's family comes and asks the bride's family for the marriage, and they bring a woman out that's wearing a veil, and they lift the veil, and the groom goes, "No, that's not the one I want." And the third one is always the right
The
one.
one. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then that was just the engagement ceremony, and then later on we went back for the wedding.
Mm.
So
Well, that provides a kind of transition to what I wanted to ask you about next, and that was tribes
Mhm.
in Ghana. I'm assuming there are tribes there.
yeah, there's a lot of tribes.
Can you talk about that and in distinction of people, Ghanaians, who were not tribal members?
So the non-tribal members would have to be people from other countries
Okay.
or expatriates.
So if you were born in Ghana,
You were in a tribe.
you were in a tribe,
Yeah.
some tribe.
Yeah.
How many tribes? Any idea?
I don't. I know that there are probably, of the larger ones, there's probably maybe a dozen of the larger tribes, and who knows how many smaller tribes
Uh-huh.
there might be. Some of those tribes crossed political boundaries. So like when Ghana was originally started, there was just a artificial political boundary that was drawn that separated Togo from Ghana. And so the Ewe people that lived in the eastern side of Ghana also lived on the western side of Togo. And so it was, you might have family members or tribal members that lived in another country.
Did any of the tribes court you? We want you to, like us, to be, we can make you an honorary tribal member?
No,
None of that?
no. There was a family that I stayed with, and a lot of Peace Corps volunteers tried to maintain contact with the families that they stayed with. We spent a week, and that was also optional. So if at any point you felt uncomfortable or unsafe, you could just say, "Okay, I'm going to go back to the training site."
Uh-huh.
But they wanted you to try to stay for a week. And while I was there, there was a wedding that took place. The host family would take me around and introduce me to a lot of the family members. One of the embarrassing moments was we went to a guy that had been a pretty high up in the Ghanaian police.
Mm-hmm.
And he was retired now, and he lived in a nice house close by to the family where I was staying. And there's a traditional way of greeting somebody that you're visiting.
Uh-huh.
So you would start out by saying "go," and that's just announcing your presence. It's kind of like, I'm here, and they would say "ame," and then you'd start, how's your family?
Talking.
Just start talking after that. So the retired police chief was sitting on a veranda at the front of his house, and there were a set of steps that you would go up to, and to where he was sitting, and then the door was there also. So you said, hey, the host family said, go visit the police chief. Like, okay. So I went over and I saw him up there, and I'm sure he was expecting me. So I walk up the steps, and at the top of the steps I go, "I'll go." And he looked at me with a mean look, and he said, "You did it wrong. Go back to the bottom of the steps, and that's where you say "a go." It's like, should I just run? I went back to the bottom of the steps, and I said "a go," and he said "ame," and then he motioned for me to walk up the steps, and motioned for me to sit down, and then it was like we were best friends.
Oh, wow.
But I was really concerned that I had just ruined my Peace Corps service at that point.
Wow. Did you know anybody who did ruin their Peace Corps service?
There was one volunteer that we were told that, I mentioned the local beer. There was also another alcoholic drink that was a local gin. And so they would take that beer and they would distill it, and that distilled drink was called apateshi. And we were warned not to drink it.
Who warned you?
Peace Corps staff.
Okay.
They just said, there's no quality control. It might have methanol in it, or methanol, and if you drink it, you might go blind, you might die, you don't know, so just don't drink it.
Yeah.
Very high alcohol content and very unsafe. Well, one of the volunteers went to a bar one night, and I think he prided himself on how much he could drink, and so he started drinking shots of apateshi, and he got way too drunk. He was a teacher at a school, and he ended up getting reassigned.
Out of the country, or?
No, just to a different school that, they just thought, okay, we don't want people to think that Peace Corps volunteers are like that. So, they made it clear that he was being punished for his behavior, and then I'm sure he was told, this won't happen again.
If it does happen again, you will go.
Yeah. So there was, so Ghana was not only the first country to receive Peace Corps volunteers, but up to that point in time, they had never sent anybody home for disciplinary reasons.
Up till your time.
Well, even after my time.
Yeah.
I heard several years later that there was somebody that I think they showed up, they went through training, but they never went to their site. They just went and hung out on the beach, and they just said, go to your site. It's like, no, I'm fine. And so they just said, okay, we think you need to go home. This isn't a 2-year vacation.
Yeah.
So so they were kind of proud of that, and so you really had to, what it would take at that point for them to ruin that reputation of never having sent anybody home, would have to be something pretty serious.
Yeah. Now, you've mentioned that you extended.
I did.
Right?
Yeah.
What point was that? That was 96?
So two years is normal service. So I went there in 94, and most of my friends came back in 95. So they stayed there summer of 95, and then so it would have been the summer of 96 that you would have come back. So it would have been the 2 years.
Okay.
And so they asked us at one of our meetings if we were interested in extending for another year. And there were pretty strict conditions. So you had to want to stay. There had to be whatever position you were in. There had to still be a need for it. And whoever your counterpart was in your assignment. So a Ghanaian counterpart had to agree that they wanted you to stay.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they needed it, maybe you wanted to stay, but maybe you were doing a bad job, and they might say, we don't want you to stay.
Yeah.
So about 10 or 12 of the volunteers from my group extended for a third year.
Now you're talking about the original 60?
Right.
Okay, so there were 10 or 12 wanted to stay.
Mm-hmm.
Did all 10 or 12 manage to extend? For another?
There was one that didn't get that confirmation from their Ghanaian counterpart. So I think Peace Corps kind of knew that things weren't really working out very well,
Mm-hmm.
and so she asked to stay. And they needed it, but the Ghanaian counterpart didn't want that volunteer to stay in that position.
How much serious thought did you give to your decision about extending?
I gave it a lot of thought, and a lot of it had to do with enjoying and finding fulfillment in teaching more than I ever would have thought.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I loved the people there. I just couldn't think of a reason to go home at that point. And I thought, I want to stay. Now, there is a cap now. There is a limit. You're only allowed to stay for 5 years in Peace Corps.
Well, I didn't even know that. 5 years.
Well, it used to
That's
be
a lot.
that there wasn't a cap. And my understanding is that there were people that went there and never left. And so
I
they
never heard of that. Wow.
and so they decided that they needed to limit how long you could stay.
Mm-hmm.
Partly it was to give other people, because there are only so many slots,
Right.
and so part of it was to give other people a chance to do Peace Corps
Certainly.
service,
Mm-hmm.
and to get people that, and there's nothing to say that after you finish Peace Corps that you can't stay there. There was one guy from my group that he got a degree in African Studies, and he wanted to do development work, and Peace Corps was his foot in the door to get there, and he
That's what he needed.
he was probably the least seen volunteer in my region.
Uh-huh.
It's like, where's Peter? He's at his site
Doing his thing.
doing his thing.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, he's still there.
Now, when you extend for a year. Is that right?
1 year at a time,
Yeah.
right? And so that way, somewhere in the middle of that year, when they're looking how many spots they need to fill, and they ask how many people are interested in extending. And I gave some thought to extending for a fourth year, but I thought, well, I don't want to be one of those guys that never goes home. I could see myself staying there.
Also, I want to ask you, you saw yourself as a teacher now. I mean, you really like teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So you could see yourself teaching back in the U.S.
And I did do that when I came back.
Okay.
I didn't have a teaching certificate, but it's much like now. There was such a need for teachers that I went through an alternative certification program, and I just started teaching. As soon as I found a job, I started teaching while I was completing those requirements for the certification.
Okay.
And I finished those in about a year.
So when did you leave?
97.
In the summer of 97?
It was the fall of 97.
Oh.
Normally it would have been in the summer, but that was the summer that I did training. And so I stayed there and then helped with training the new. I had trained the year before, so that was my second year of training the incoming people. And then once that was finished, then I went home.
That's a great way to leave, I think.
Yeah.
To help somebody else who's just coming in,
Mm-hmm.
that's a wonderful way to leave.
It was funny, the connections for planes are very difficult, so you're always trying to match up with somebody else's schedule. So the flight to come back didn't leave until 1 o'clock in the morning. And then I would fly to, I think I flew to Italy, went to Rome, and then back to the United States. And so it just so happened that that day, the new trainees were coming in. So the volunteer population in Ghana had grown to the point where they needed to separate out the training groups.
Mm-hmm.
So the first group that I worked with was the education volunteers, and then all of the other volunteers in the other programs came once that was concluded. And so they arrived the same day that I was leaving.
No.
And so
You didn't get any. You didn't get to help them.
not those. I got to help
Yeah,
all of
the ones
the
before.
education volunteers.
Yeah.
And so I'm waiting for my plane to leave, and here come all these volunteers. It's like, hey, there's a place across the street where you guys can go get something to eat and something to drink.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, hey, is there anybody in this group from Oklahoma? It's like, oh, Audrey's from Oklahoma. So I met Audrey, and it turns out that she grew up on this street.
Wow.
So I grew up about a mile south of here, and so she gave me her parents' name and phone number and address and said, hey, call them up and tell them I made it safe and sound and I'm happy and healthy.
Audrey who?
Audrey Huffman.
Oh, wow.
So her parents lived 3 houses down on the other side of the street. Now I did not remember that. I remember coming to visit them, and they had me over for dinner, and I just talked, and her father was a Peace Corps volunteer in Nigeria. And so we traded stories.
Oh, yeah. Barb gave me his name, I think.
Okay.
What's his first?
Dan.
Yeah, that's
Dan
right.
Huffman.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you first, before I get to the last part,
Mm-hmm.
about what you think were your greatest accomplishments in Peace Corps, the most fulfilling, and have you ever thought about those?
I have, and when I told you about the Peace Corps reunion that we had a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it was almost universal that the volunteers said that they got much more out of that experience than anything that they felt like they did
Right.
while they were there.
Mm-hmm.
There was another person that just stepped up to take over that spot as a teacher. And I think it goes back to the 3 goals of the Peace Corps, where the first one is to provide a service to the country, and then the second goal is for you to learn about that culture, and then the third goal is to come back and to share what you've learned with other people, because not everybody's going to have a chance to go to Ghana or even go overseas.
Sure.
And so,
And certainly not in a situation like you found.
right, it might be on a cruise where you go
Right.
to on an excursion at
Right.
there on the coast, and that's the extent. You might have somebody selling T-shirts, and that's your only contact. Yeah, just that deep experience of living in that culture, and just moving around day to day, and just getting to learn the ins and outs as much as you can.
How have you shared this with people who don't know about it?
So the easiest one is to share it with other Peace Corps volunteers that have come home.
Mm-hmm.
They are probably the most enthusiastic to hear about your experience,
Right.
and then to compare and contrast with their own experiences. And I found that just like the meeting with the other volunteers in Ghana and saying, oh, what was it like teaching at your school? Well, it's just like what it was at my school.
Uh-huh.
And then coming back, it's so weird. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's the South Pacific or Eastern Europe or Asia someplace, that there are just some aspects of Peace Corps service that just seem to be universal. And so there's a receptiveness to other Peace Corps volunteers to hear about that. The second group that is a little less likely to want to hear are people that maybe not done Peace Corps service but have traveled.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can at least connect to that being in another culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, maybe you were just on a tour of Rome, you went to Italy or something, but you were still in a different culture,
Mm-hmm.
and things were a little bit different. Everything's just a little bit off from what you're used to.
Right.
And so they're probably the second most receptive group.
Uh-huh.
And then maybe the third group would just be people who are just naturally curious. And then the
Sure.
rest of the population, it's like, I've lived in Oklahoma my life, and it's done right by me, and you know, I really don't care that you've been outside of Oklahoma, much less another country.
Yeah.
And you know, there's not much.
You're not talking to them.
Yeah. Although, you know, I came back and I started teaching, and so that was an opportunity. You know, I had a captive audience there. Most of them had probably never traveled very far. Maybe a handful of them had been outside of the country before. But I thought, here's my chance. You know, I had a little PowerPoint presentation that showed pictures, and I shared experiences. It taught them a little bit about Ghana. It taught them a little bit about what my life was and what Peace Corps was about. And so maybe I planted a little seed among one of my students. That,
well, what and where did you teach when you first came back?
So I came back and mostly I taught math. So that's probably my strong suit.
And where?
My first teaching job was in eastern Oklahoma in a small town called Wowoka.
I know it.
Okay.
Creek Nation.
It's the capital of Seminole Nation.
Oh, Seminole.
Seminole
You're right.
Nation.
Yeah, that's right.
I had one of my Peace Corps friends came to visit me, and after we drove around Wowoka, he said, "I think you're still in the Peace Corps, Steve," because it's a town of great contrast. There's a lot of poverty there, and there's a lot of wealth there.
How did you wind up out there? Why didn't you just get a job here in Oklahoma City?
So I came back in the fall, and so most of the teaching positions were already filled.
Yeah.
Plus I had to start that process of emergency certification. So I had to pass the certification tests, which were not a problem. And then I had to submit my application and get approved. And so that took a while. I didn't get my emergency certification until late November, early December. So I thought, well, I'm just going to have to do tutoring or something until next school year. And I was looking through the want ads when they still had newspapers and want ads.
Yeah.
And there was an advertisement for a teaching job in Wowoka. So I went out, I did, then they were on a block schedule, so they started new classes every semester. So you taught 4 classes for a semester, and then the next semester you would do 4 different classes. And they had a teacher that was retiring in the middle of the school year. They needed to replace him. And there were only 1 or 2 other applicants for the job, and I had much more experience, and they felt like my Peace Corps experience would be useful in dealing with all the different cultures there in Wowoka. So they offered me the job.
Oh, that sounds great.
So I was there for about 5 years. Then I met Barb, and so I moved back to Oklahoma City and took a job teaching at Aztec Charter School. And we did that until...
Now, when did Barb, I can't remember, when was Barb in the Peace Corps?
She was in the Peace Corps in the early 90s. I think it was 90 to 92.
Okay. So she preceded you.
Right.
In the Peace Corps.
Yeah. So we had that shared Peace Corps experience, but she was at a different time in a different country.
Yeah, very different.
So, and then when I came back, we met because she was leading up the Oklahoma Return Peace Corps group, and she was trying to get people to go to an event up in Tulsa. And so we met up there at that event and then started dating.
Yeah.
So she's also a teacher, and we ran into another set of volunteers at a multicultural festival, and then when they said, "Oh, we're Peace Corps volunteers," the husband was the director of the American School in Madagascar.
Ooh.
And so they were trying to, the husband was in town recruiting to fill positions that they needed, and we thought, wow, we could go back overseas again. So we got the job, and I was teaching high school math and science classes, and she was teaching elementary math.
I remember when you all left.
Yeah.
And what year was that?
That was the year Noah was born. That was quite a concern. 90. Oh, I'm in trouble now. 93. No, 2003.
2003, yeah.
2003. And he was 6 months old when we left, and so we were pretty
Wow.
concerned. And then it was also neat because we got to see Peace Corps from the other side, because there were a lot of volunteers in Madagascar, and the Peace Corps office was not that far from our house. And so we kind of threw our doors open. You know, if anybody needs a place to stay when you're in the capital, you know, you're welcome.
And I'm sure they took you up on it.
So there was the Peace Corps hostel, which was a house with a bunch of bedrooms where you could go and stay.
Oh, huh.
And so you could go there and hang out with all of the other Peace Corps volunteers. But if you wanted a little more peace and quiet, then you could come to our house. We had 4 or 5 bedrooms in our house that we weren't using. And so they could just come in, and you know, we just told the guards there that if somebody came up and said they were in the Peace Corps, to just let them in.
Mm-hmm.
And they could just go up and find a room where they wanted to stay.
That sounds great.
It was fun. And then we made friends with volunteers there, and then so we took opportunities to go and visit them at their site. We visited at least 3 or 4 where we stayed with them.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And so we got to see what their Peace Corps experience was like. And
Gosh, that's great.
yeah. And just like when in Ghana, you know, come to the close of service, it's like, well, I don't want to go home. I just want to stay here.
Uh-huh. So how long did you stay in Madagascar?
Our contract was for 2 years, and we stayed for that. And then you could extend year by year. They just needed to know before they went on their recruiting trips to look for replacements
Right.
if you're going to be there the next year. And we just decided that we needed to come home. Both of our parents were getting older and starting to have health problems. We needed to be closer to them.
Plus you'd had your fun.
Some of it. Yeah, I mean, Madagascar is one of the most unique places in the world.
Why? How?
So the thought is that there were people from Southeast Asia that went along the south coast of Asia and down the east coast of Africa and landed there. So some of the tribes there have a very Asian look to them, and some of them have a very African appearance. And so there's quite a mix of the different tribes there from different cultures. And so Barb's background is in wildlife and fishery sciences, so she's fascinated by animals. And you know, Australia and Madagascar are probably the 2 most unique places that you can go to. And so we just thought, this fell in our lap. This was just meant to be. So we went there, and we bought a car there so that we could travel, you know, because Noah was so young. We didn't want to just use public transportation with him.
No.
So,
gosh, that just sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it was great. The baobab trees, all of the wildlife. I mean, we went to nature preserves where we just saw lemurs in the wild.
Ooh, yeah, wonderful.
We had some friends that came to visit. Barb was pregnant then with our second child, and so she couldn't make the trip. But I went with 2 of the members of the other family, and we went up to there's a peninsula on the northeast side of Madagascar that's some of the only remaining primary rainforest that they've set aside and preserved. And so we went up there and stayed there for about 10 days and got to go on nature walks and these really interesting hikes and tours. So.
Now the last thing that most interviewers ask, and I will too, is has there been anything that you've thought about telling me that I haven't asked about and you haven't until right now thought about? Is there any last thing, either an anecdote or a lesson or whatever?
Oh. You know, I didn't have any family that came to visit me, but it was fairly common for people to, you know, family members, parents, or siblings that would come to visit. And I remember meeting up with one of my friend's uncle and twin sister that came to visit. And we spent a couple of weeks traveling around. Most of what we did was on public transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And we did some things that I didn't take the time to do the rest of the time that I was there. So we went down to the coast and visited the slave castles.
Oh.
So Cape Coast is a big city on the coast, and it's where they would bring the captured slaves and hold them in the castles until the ships came and take them to wherever they were going.
Uh-huh.
And that was heart-wrenching.
What period of time are we talking about when they were using these castles to
1600s, 1700s, and I'm not sure how long they lasted. So the docks and piers that they used were long gone, but they might still have some of the posts that went out into the water. And during the tour of the castle, then you would end up at the doors where you open the door, and then you would be led in chains out to the ship, and you would be loaded on the ship. And it's like, this is the end of their life in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And just trying to wrap my head around that chapter, that dark chapter in our history.
Yeah.
And then another thing on that same trip was...
So you're glad you saw it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now, it ended up, I probably would have had another opportunity, but I didn't know that was going to happen. When I did the training that last year that I was there, they'd moved the training site to a town that it was called Salt Pond, and it was within easy driving distance of Cape Coast. And so it would have been pretty easy, and that was actually a part of the tour, not the tour, part of the training then was to take the volunteers to the slave castles.
Mm-hmm.
And that caused a lot of, there were some very heated discussions that came out about as a result of that.
Yeah.
When we went through training, it was closer to the capital, and it would have been a much more difficult journey to make.
Yeah.
So we didn't do that during our training. And then the other part was there was a national park that was located in the south central part, not too far from the coast. And we went there, and it had a canopy walk. So there was an NGO that came in that was trying to help develop ecotourism there. And so you would climb steps up to the top of a tree, and then there would be a walkway that would go from tree to tree,
mm-hmm.
and it would allow you to see into the forest in a way that you wouldn't be able to see from the ground. And that was getting to see a different side. That was really my first introduction into the concept of ecotourism, and just seeing the impact that a growing population had on the ecology of the country. Just, that area is getting smaller and smaller.
One thing that just occurred to me, I asked Barb this, and I want to ask you too. What did you think during the COVID time when Peace Corps shut down?
I was afraid that was going to be the last nail in the coffin, that it would be the best excuse that politicians could come up with to just say, we're done with Peace Corps. It started in 1960, and it's run its course.
Mm-hmm.
Got other things we'd rather do. And so that was what my thought was. Evacuated everybody from every country,
mm-hmm.
and brought them home. And we met some of those volunteers at some of our returned Peace Corps groups. We had one lady that had come back, and she was confident that one way or another she was going to go back. Mm-hmm. That even if Peace Corps didn't continue, she was going to go there and finish the work that she'd started.
Great.
But I think that there were enough returned Peace Corps volunteers that made their voice heard and said, this needs to continue, and convinced enough politicians that they should bring it back.
But you were very fearful.
I was, yeah.
So was I. So was I.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's... All right, take it.
Okay. So I mentioned about how the Peace Corps did a really good job of acclimating us to the food and the culture. And so they made a slow transition from having mostly American food during training. Towards the end, it was mostly Ghanaian food.
Mm-hmm.
But there were still a few things that, I had some of my favorite dishes, but there were still quite a few dishes that I didn't like. At my school, they provided lunch for the students, and it was a dish called kenkey, which is like a fermented corn dough that has that bitter taste like sauerkraut, and I just never really liked it very much. They would take the fermented corn dough and then they would serve it with a bean stew, and they had the same thing for lunch every single day. But they were happy to eat it. It was like having bacon and eggs for breakfast here. You could just do it all the time. So it was probably 4 months into my service when I had lost 50 pounds and I was very hungry. I'd always brought lunch with me, but I'd finished the food that I'd brought, as staples that I was very familiar with. But I was still hungry, and I didn't have time to go to the market and get something else, and so I went over to the place where they served the students. And I got the bowl with the bean stew and the kenkey. Now the students all eat outside. They have picnic tables, or they can just sit on the veranda at the school and just eat wherever they want, unless it was raining and they would eat inside. Well, there was a table for faculty to sit at, but none of the faculty ever ate outside. It was kind of a weird cultural thing about eating in front of other people. So they would go to their classroom and eat there, but I always ate my lunch out at the picnic table. So that was business as usual, seeing Science Master Reid eating his lunch at the picnic table. But it was unusual when then I got up and went over to the canteen and bought a plate of kenkey and bean stew. And then it got real quiet. And everybody was watching me. And I went over, sat down at the table, and I unfolded it has sort of a wrap to it like a tamale does. So I unwrapped it, and I took a piece of it and dipped it in the stew, and I ate it. And as soon as I put that little piece of food in my mouth, the campus just erupted. They were just so excited. They'd never seen me eat food with them before. I'm sure they probably even wondered if I ate anything. And it was just so heartwarming that they just were so excited about me eating
that's
local
fantastic.
food.
Yeah. I was also going to ask you at one point, did you feel like you were constantly being watched?
I did.
Because you were, right?
Right. Now, my room where I lived was a compound house, and so there was restricted access to that. The family that lived there, the relatives of the guy that worked at the Diamond Commission, they were the caretakers of the house, and they wouldn't let just anybody come in. It's like, oh, I want to go talk to the Peace Corps volunteer. It's like, no, he'll come visit you. We'll let him know you were here. So they kind of controlled that. So I was able to go to my room and not worry about anybody watching me. But anytime I was outside, if I was in the street or if I was on a bus, and I remember in particular I was sitting on a bus and there was a mother and the young child that was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I remember them looking at my arm and they were rubbing my arm.
Of course.
It's like, wow, what? That's really different. And
it's got hair on it.
Yeah. It's like, wow. I just smiled. It's like, yeah, it's all right.
I was watched, all the time. And I was aware of it.